Anytime a child is sent to a foster home, everyone in that situation is hoping for the best, that the child is leaving an abusive or neglectful home and will be welcomed into a warm, loving home. When that doesn't happen, it's devastating. But what's even worse is when adults become foster parents only to take children in and abuse them. And that seems to be what happened in this case. Not only was a little girl abused, but her disappearance went unnoticed for years until everything came crashing down on these so-called foster parents. This is the story of Ana Loera, aka Charisma Marquez. Charisma Marquez was born to her mother, Priscilla Marquez, on January 22, 2007 in Phoenix, Arizona. Charisma was described as being cheerful, full of excitement, and always laughing and giggling at everything. She was outgoing and sassy, with a big personality that perfectly matched her name, Charisma. She was such a happy little girl, always smiling and full of joy. She was the type of kid who could brighten anybody's mood. Her older brother would go on to say that even when he was in a bad mood, if he saw Charisma and her big smile, his mood would immediately brighten.
There she is. That's her first birthday. She was a very happy little girl, very spontaneous. She had a lot of character. Her name went with her. She was very sassy, a sassy little girl. She was going to be the little cheerleader. She had this kinky, curly hair that when you pull it down, it sinks up.
She was bouncy. Like, she made you happy. Like, she could walk up to you and just by looking at her face, you're like happy. And you could be in the downest mood and all of a sudden just joy walks into the room.
She brought sunshine to everybody's sadness. She was never sad.
However, when Charisma was born, her mother Priscilla was going through a rough time in her life. She was battling with a severe methamphetamine addiction that resulted in her being a very absent mother. Starting in December of 2009, the Department of Child and Family Services, or DCFS, received multiple calls to report that Charisma and her 5 other siblings were being neglected by their mother. So by 2011, Priscilla's 6 children were removed from her care. 3 of them, including 4-year-old Charisma and 2 of her siblings, were placed together into foster care. Another one of the children was placed into another foster home, while the last 2 children were placed into the care of relatives. For the sake of this case, we will be focusing on Charisma and her 2 siblings who were placed together. Eventually, the 3 of them were placed into the care of now 51-year-old Maribel Loera and 57-year-old Rafael Loera. At the time, Priscilla knew that she could not provide the care to her children that they deserved, but she was hopeful that their foster parents would raise them in a loving, caring home. Meanwhile, Priscilla worked to get her life back on the right path. At first, once the children were placed with the Loeras, it seemed like they would be well cared for. After some time with them, the couple adopted Charisma. When doing so, they changed her name to Ana Loera, which is what I will be referring to her as for the remainder of the video. I also want to note that it's not clear whether Ana's 2 siblings were also adopted, but we do know that Ana for sure was adopted. Once the children were with the Loeras, they were enrolled in public school. One neighbor reported that for the weeks they were in school, she would carpool them. But shortly after starting, Maribel informed the neighbor that she was pulling the kids out of school so she could homeschool them. Some people would argue that this is a red flag, but some parents do just prefer to homeschool their children, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, during the years of living with the Loeras, there were a few incidents that were concerning to social workers, but nothing was really ever escalated to the point where they feared for the children's safety. For example, in 2013, the Loeras took then 6-year-old Ana to the Phoenix Children's Hospital with concerns for a swollen eye. Maribel and Rafael said that she got the injury while playing hide-and-seek at daycare. Obviously, this was concerning, and doctors did not believe that a swollen eye is consistent with playing hide-and-seek. So this was reported to DCFS, But after investigating the incident, they found no evidence of intentional abuse or neglect. The report stated that Raphael and Maribel did take the proper precautions by bringing Ana to the hospital, and by all accounts, they were very forthcoming and cooperative. At this time, the case was closed. I do also want to note that when it comes to foster parenting, as many of you know, social workers will regularly check up on the kids and make sure that they're safe in the home. But once the adoption is finalized, these regular visits are stopped. So it is only when something is reported to CPS that a social worker will go into the home and investigate. By October of 2014, another report came into DCFS. This time, a report was made after discovering that 2 of the children in their home appeared to have bruising to their buttocks. We don't know which children this report was about because names are only released in reports if a child has died, so we don't know if it was Ana, we don't know if it was her siblings, or possibly the other children who had been adopted by the Loeras. However, after following up on this report, once again, DCFS found no evidence of child abuse, so they closed the case once again. After that, things were quiet for the Loeras. During that time of peace in 2016, the couple adopted yet another child, this time an infant girl. We don't know at this point exactly how many children were in that home, but I believe there were 5. There were at least 4 based off of what we know, but I do believe there were 5 at one point. After this adoption, there were no further allegations of abuse or calls to DCFS until January 20th, 2020. By that point, one of their adopted children, an 11-year-old girl, called the authorities to report that she had been left home alone for 2 days and she was hungry and scared. Authorities responded to the call, and when they saw the 11-year-old little girl, she had visible injuries all over her body. According to reports, she had bruises, burns, and abrasions all over. There were too many injuries to even count. It appears that she was hit with a rope-like object, leaving lacerations all over her body. At the time, this little girl was the only child in the home. None of her adoptive siblings were there, and neither were her adoptive parents. As we would later find out, the other siblings were living with their mother in another state. They literally just moved out of the home and left this 11-year-old little girl by herself. Meanwhile, at this time, the whereabouts of Raphael were unknown. Now, after responding to this call and finding the little girl, she was taken into custody where she sat down with officers and spoke about her treatment within the home. She said that Maribel had a bad temper and would always hit her with various objects. Most recently, she would hit her with a knotted extension cord and then slam her head into walls. In this interview, she also noted that she had an older sister who she hadn't seen in about 2 years. She told officers that her mother, Maribel, said that her sister had been adopted and sent to Colombia. Meanwhile, Raphael told her that she had been sent to Mexico. Obviously, both stories are concerning and raised a red flag to investigators. Of course, after learning all of this information, the little girl was removed from the home and placed into the care of another foster family. After she was removed from the home, an investigation into the Loeras was reopened. By January 27th, DCFS workers in Arizona worked with CPS workers in Minnesota, where the family was now living, and they were able to make contact with Maribel and the 2 children who were living with her. Once arrangements in that state were made to remove the children, a neighbor informed law enforcement that Maribel had actually left the state with her 2 children, so now she was back in Phoenix, Arizona. By the following day, January 28th, DCFS workers visited the home in Phoenix where they were able to make contact with Maribel and removed her 2 children from the home. But just an hour after the kids were removed from the home, still on January 28th, 911 received yet another call. This time, it was to report a house fire at the same residence. When firefighters responded, they saw Raphael standing in the driveway, who told them that he started a fire in the fireplace that got out of control, but he said that he put the fire out, so everything was fine. He asked that first responders not enter the home. However, firefighters could clearly see that things were not fine. There was literally smoke bellowing from the attic vents, so they went in to make sure that things were properly contained. Once firefighters made their way inside, they discovered that the fire had not been started from the fireplace, but it had been set in the corner of the living room. They started to try and ventilate the home by tearing down some drywall and removing the insulation from the walls and ceiling. However, when they were doing so, they were stopped dead in their tracks. In the drywall on the ceiling, resting on top of the attic insulation, firefighters found what they believed to be human remains. Immediately, they called the police, who responded shortly after. Once at the home, police examined the scene and discovered that there was a partial skeleton hidden behind the drywall between the attic and the ceiling in the living room. This prompted investigators to search more areas of the home and in the yard. And after searching the shed located in the backyard, they found even more human bones. They determined that these bones did belong to the same skeleton as the bones found in the living room, and pretty quickly, they determined that these bones belonged to a child. So the remains were removed and immediately sent to the medical examiner for an autopsy. And it was at that time that the medical examiner discovered that these remains belonged to Ana Loera, who would have been 13 years old at the time. According to the autopsy, these remains indicated that Ana had been dead for at least a year. It was also discovered that prior to her death, Ana had suffered horrific abuse. The ME found acute fractures to her skull and to the left side of her mandible, acute meaning they were sustained very recently before her death and were not yet healed. Additionally, they found other fractures that were either healed or in the process of healing to her right clavicle, multiple ribs on the left and right sides. She had 3 vertebral fractures, several bones in her hands had been fractured, as well as her pelvis and both femurs. All of these fractures were believed to be sustained before death because obviously when you die, your bones aren't going to try and start healing. I mention that because some people might say like, oh, these bones were degraded and in the walls for a long time. They could have, suffered fractures during that time while they were breaking down. But no, that's not the case. They were sustained before death. Based on these findings, the ME determined that Ana Loera died as the result of abuse, which included both chronic and acute injuries. It was very clear that Ana had been brutally and horrifically beaten to death. I just want you to take a moment to really take in all of those injuries she had. A fracture to her skull and the left side of her mandible. That means that she had been beaten in the head or had her head slammed or she was punched in the face or all of the above. Both of her femurs were broken, which if you don't know anything about the human body, one thing you should know is that your femurs are some of the hardest bones in your bodies to break, as well as your pelvis. So the abuse that she had to sustain to break both femurs and her pelvis, it's just horrific. While the ME was working to complete Ana's autopsy, both Raphael and Maribel had been taken in and questioned. Pretty much immediately, Raphael admitted that he was the one who set fire to the home. He took a hose and siphoned gasoline from his car and used that to start a fire in the home. He said that he did this because he wanted to take his own life, but obviously he was not successful in doing so. He then went on to describe what was really going on within the home where Ana and the 4 other children lived. He said that Maribel was very abusive towards the children in the home. He said that she would hit them with extension cords and the broom handle. She would slam their heads, as we heard from the 11-year-old earlier. Raphael said that he did try to stop the abuse in the past, but anytime he tried defending the children, Maribel would start hitting him with the broom handle. As if he couldn't just call 911 to report this and get himself out of the situation and get the courts involved, he just decided to go along with it, I guess. When talking about the 11-year-old whose 911 call started this whole chain of events, he said that the family actually moved to Minnesota, but that he and the 11-year-old returned to Arizona. He said that he was trying to protect this child from Maribel, but he couldn't afford to stay home with her. He had to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, including a job that he had at a local high school as a teacher's aide. In working these jobs, he had to leave the 11-year-old home alone for the majority of the day, every day. After the girl was removed from the home on January 20th, and after CPS agents in Minnesota made contact with Maribel, she returned back to Phoenix with the 2 other children. Then Raphael got to talking about an older daughter who would be 13 years old at the time. Initially, he tried telling officers that this other child was adopted out to a family in Mexico, but ultimately, after some pushing, he admitted to officers that this was a lie, and the story of what really happened to Ana is absolutely heartbreaking. Raphael admitted to officers that back in July of 2017, you heard me right, 2017, 2 years prior, 11-year-old Ana had gotten sick. She was throwing up constantly, so she was clearly very sick and something was very wrong. But Raphael and Maribel decided to wait a few days before they would seek medical treatment. Eventually, they decided to put her in the car and head to the hospital, but when they did this, she started throwing up even more and convulsing before she died in the car. After realizing she died, Maribel and Raphael immediately got scared that if the authorities found out, their other children would be taken away. So they turned around and went home with Ana's body, failing to contact anybody to report her death. Raphael then admitted that he wrapped up Ana's body in a sheet and put her in the attic to hide her. For the 2 years that followed, the entire family lived in that home with the body of a dead child hidden in the drywall. Then, before setting the house on fire on January 28th, Raphael moved some of the remains and placed them in the backyard in that shed. Raphael admitted that Maribel was extremely abusive towards Ana around the time of her death and said that they probably would find a lot of injuries in her autopsy. I also want to note that it was only a month or 2 after Ana died when Raphael and Maribel adopted their new infant daughter. So after finding out all of this information, initially both Raphael and Maribel were arrested and charged with child abuse, abandonment, concealment of a dead body, as well as arson of an occupied structure. But about a year after their arrests, after the autopsy results were released, their charges were upped to first-degree murder. To me, I think it's clear that after suffering the most horrific abuse imaginable, Ana probably did start convulsing because she probably had a severe brain injury, since we literally saw that her skull had been cracked. I don't think they ever considered taking her to the hospital. I think Maribel beat poor Ana to death and concealed her body for the 2 years that followed, and they thought that they got away with it this entire time. And then when things were all coming to a head after that 11-year-old called 911 and the police were on their tail, Raphael tried burning the house down, not only to take his own life, but also to cover up for what they did to poor Ana. As of right now, this case is just sitting, waiting to be tried. Of course, both Maribel and Raphael have pleaded not guilty, and originally their trial was scheduled to start in March of this year. But when I looked into the court documents in this case, it appears that the case is now set to take place in 2025. I'm not sure why this case is being delayed so much. Maybe investigators are trying to get more solid evidence. Otherwise, I'm not sure. But with that being said, a huge aspect of this case that so many people just cannot understand is how in the world no one knew about Ana's disappearance for 2 damn years. How did no one report her missing? Yes, she was apparently homeschooled during this time, but neighbors say that one day they saw Ana and the other day she was gone. Did nobody think to report this? The same family that had been reported to DCFS multiple times has a child who suddenly stops showing up and nobody bats an eye, and then they're just able to adopt a child with no home visits, no questions as to where their other daughter is. I have no idea how this all happened and just she slipped through the cracks. I have no idea how she was missed. It's infuriating to know that 2 years passed and nobody even knew that Ana was missing. It's just so heartbreaking. Of course, after all of this devastating news came out, Ana's birth mother, Priscilla, is devastated. She reported that for the prior 7 years of her life, she has been cleaning things up for herself. She's been sober for years. She worked a stable job for 5 years, cleaning hotel rooms and earning promotions. She also found stable housing for herself and her children. She was fighting hard for years to get her children back, but of course, now it's too late. She does now have a relationship with her oldest children, who are now 21 and 18. Her goal someday is to save enough money to have all of her children live with her once they turn 18 and are able to leave their adoptive homes. She wants to give them the stability that they didn't have growing up. But with that being said, of course, Priscilla blames herself for what happened. She has no idea how nobody knew about her daughter's disappearance for 2 years. And beyond that, she wants to know why on earth someone would go out of their way to adopt not just one child, but multiple children if you're just going to abuse them. What kind of monster takes vulnerable children into their home just to abuse them? We had the same questions when speaking about the case of Layla Daniels, who also died a horrific death at the hands of a foster parent who went out of their way to take her in. In my opinion, I think these people are in it for the money. They receive benefits from raising children that aren't theirs, and I think that Maribel knew that if she adopted Ana, the DCFS visits would stop. So she would still get the payments while not having to worry about DCFS seeing the horrific abuse that the children were suffering. I'm grateful that even though Ana was very badly decomposed by the time she was found, that her body showed just how horrific her treatment was, because if there were no visible injuries, there's no telling what they could have gotten away with if there was no proof of the abuse. But at the same time, we saw how many fractures she had and where she had them. I do not take that lightly. She had head injuries. She was beaten so badly that her skull was fractured. That takes so much force, and the fact that someone can inflict that on an 11-year-old child is just beyond me. At the end of the day, I'm very, very happy for that brave 11-year-old little girl who called the authorities and started this whole chain of events that led to the discovery of the abuse that they had all suffered, as well as what really happened to Ana. Now, hopefully, these absolute monsters will have to face what they did and hopefully spend the rest of their miserable lives behind bars. But as of right now, that is all of the information that we have in this case. I know not a lot of it was very detailed, a lot of it was just surface level information, but that's all that is available even in court documents. As with any cases like this one, I will update you all with any new information that comes out. If there is a trial, I will probably make another video if we find out more about what was really happening in that home, if we get more details. But for now, that is all we know. So that is where I'm going to end today's video, and now I want to know what you all think. What do you think of Ana being missing for 2 years and never being reported? What do you think of how she died? Do you really think it was because she got sick, or do you think she was beaten to death? And what do you think of Rafael? Do you think he was more involved in the abuse than he admitted, or do you think it was all Maribel? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts that you have in the comments below. If you like this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to follow my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions that you would like to see covered on this channel, make sure you fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.